Hello everyone and welcome to Mountain Lake Journal. I'm Paul Larson. Many of us know that time with a good book is time well spent. People read for pleasure, self-improvement, education, and sometimes all of the above. In this episode, you'll meet two Canadian authors. They're both focused on effective leadership, but under very different circumstances. One specializes in business leadership, and the other is navigating her way through her guiding role as a first-time mother. Up first, the most effective business leaders today are learning when to speak up and when to stay quiet. That's according to an author who says that balance is becoming crucial in the fast-changing, unpredictable conditions we face. Our Tom Halleck has more.
We are so happy to welcome back Karl Moore, who is an associate professor in the Desautels Faculty of Management at McGill University, an associate at Oxford University, and you also host a national radio program, the CEO Series, on Bell Media in Canada, which we've talked about quite a bit during your visits here. We should also mention, you are a member of our board here at Mountain Lake PBS. We talked with you in the past about some of the books you've written about leadership and what makes good leaders. You have co-authored a new book with one of your former students. We Are All Ambiverts Now. Introverts, Ambiverts, and Extroverts in the C-suite. You've touched on whether leaders are introverts or extroverts before, but now this is something new, and a lot of people may not be familiar with this term. What is an ambivert?
Well, it's a term that was invented in the U.S., in California by psychologists in the 1920s. And he's long gone, and it's really, there's one article about 15 years ago by someone from Wharton, but other than that, it's really been not picked up by the literature. But it's something I read about, and it just struck me as what I was thinking about in terms of senior leaders. That, Tom, we've thought all leaders are extroverts is an old school view that turned out to be untrue, and because I have a CEO radio show and I have a CEO class, I talked about 80 CEOs a year. And there's few advantages of being older, Tom. At my age, I've done things for 30 years, so longer than most people. Yep. So I've talked to hundreds of people, and observationally, many were more introverted. In fact, I wrote a review in my Forbes column for about a book called Quiet by Susan Cain, who's a New Yorker, Yep. and a bestseller. And I had written it, and it got over 66,000 views. 1,000 times more than normal, like unbelievable response. So the next night in the CEO class, I had asked Claude Mongeau, McGill MBA, who ran CN for decades, are you an introvert or extrovert? He said, I'm a huge introvert. The second CEO was an introvert. I'd never asked one before, and it was a genuine surprise. So I started asking them, and probably about 40% of senior executives are introverts, 40% are extroverts, it's a bell curve, and about 20% are genuine ambiverts. So an ambivert is someone who acts like an introvert at times and an extrovert at other times. They do it naturally, it seems to be part of their hard wiring. But what we're arguing is that senior leaders must learn, I'm an extrovert, I need to shut up and listen like a good introvert in order to develop good strategy and to inspire people by listening. On the other hand, an introvert must get up the front and say, we want to thank Susan for 40 years of service, and PBS here in Plattsburgh would not be the same without her as she retires, and praise her in front of a whole crowd. So it's something where both skill sets are required, but on the other hand, we're saying be true to yourself, be authentic, and only do it from time to time, not all the time. So that's the key message behind We're All Ambiverts Now, that we're trying to get out to the world and get to various places to present it. So I'm teaching it on the Stanford MBA down in California next week. So it'll be fun to share. It's the 4th year I've been there. And it's a great honor to be one of the great business schools of the world and share the ideas with an eager set of MBA students.
Yes, and you mentioned the conventional wisdom had long been that successful, charismatic CEOs, senior executives were primarily extroverts. You provided an example of one. There are introverts who have been hugely successful. Warren Buffett, one that you talk about in your book, who you said you took a class there and met him a couple of times.
Twice we visited Warren Buffett, and we were thrilled to be there, to say the least. Yeah. But it was something where he said, I'm an introvert. Like, he brought it up, and I sat with him at lunch and discussed it a bit with him. one of the best known and the wealthiest business people in the world, a great leader.
Yep.
But part of his skill was listening and investing better because he listened rather than just dominating, like some colleagues. And he said his good friend Bill Gates was also an introvert. So it's interesting that you see some of our most successful people, and I've interviewed, I think every prime minister other than Kim Campbell about being an introvert or extrovert. And Brian Mulroney, huge extrovert, as was Jean Chrétien, big extrovert. But when you think, I asked Stephen Harper, and he said he was an introvert. And also that Justin Trudeau told me he was an introvert. And I knew him after I came to McGill. He just graduated, so I spent some time with him. And when I said that, and he said I'm an introvert, I rolled my eyes. I was teasing him as I go, Justin, seriously. And he went on to explain and give evidence of how he takes introvert breaks. But he wanted to be prime minister to make the world a better place. And we can argue whether he did or not. But he knew what a prime minister's life is like because his dad was prime minister. He grew up in the prime minister's household. So he realized that if I want to make the world a better place, I need to, on occasion, act like an extrovert. And I saw him in Montreal a number of times when the crowd would just follow him around and he was the center of attention. Now, he was good-looking, charismatic, and the prime minister. So that he would get that attention, but he at heart was an introvert. And a number of and I talked to a guy, David Shrebman, who was teaches at McGill now in his 70s, but was a reporter for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington, in the White House. So he talked about Nixon as an introvert. Obama says he's an introvert. On the other hand, Ronald Reagan, huge extrovert, you know, and a mix of it in terms of both U.S. and Canadian leaders.
When you do interviews with CEOs, you ask questions that not everybody always asks, and that's always one of the questions now that you ask.
Well, it's something where I send the script that one of my script writers write, and their comms person would say to them, Karl's going to ask you this, and they know I will.
Right.
I'm also doing a book on, I did a book on Generation Zs, so I asked them about how do you manage. A lot of older people, their kids would be Zs, so they have it at home as well as at work.
Right.
So as I work on new books, I have the chance to interview people at a senior level. So the next book I'm working on is with a guy, Frank Colmar, who ran L'Oréal Canada, ran 10,000 people out of L'Oréal Paris, and his wife and kids are in Montreal. So he took early retirement at mid-50s and is now working on a book with me and teaching my CEO class with me. And a guy down here in the US at Darden, at the University of Virginia. And we have a sports analogy that you go from playing college ball to the NBA, the game speeds up. So Caitlin Clark was the top player in the world at college ball, then went to the WNBA, never missed a game in college ball, left early because of injury. The older women in the WNBA are longer experienced older women, they play rougher. And the men are worse, but those women play rougher. And so she had to quit early. It's a different game. And so I talked to the late Ken Dryden, obviously before he died, Ken Dryden, Jennifer Hale, who was the chef de mission for the Winter Olympics, a McGill grad that I taught as well. And Frank's talking to some tennis players and football players, and then Devin down in Darden's talking to NBA and NFL. So the first chapter is, that's exciting to talk people like that about sports. But we're saying you go from star salesperson to sales manager, it's a different game. And you've got to learn to slow the game down when you get to that new position. So we're interviewing 50 people at each level who've made that transition successfully. How do you slow the game down? So we're taking a sports metaphor. We get to talk to great sports people, which kind of gets people to be interested. But then we move on to more of a business topic. So that, I'm asking when I talk to CEOs about how's the role of a CEO different than CFO, COO, or CEO, whatever you were before you were CEO.
Right.
So that they with enthusiasm talk about it.
And that's the new book. When's that coming out?
Well, don't give me a hard time, but we have it's due at the end of the summer to the publisher, so October timeframe sort of thing. So
your co-author, Gabriele Hartshorne-Mehl, is a Gen Zer, Alpha?
She wrote it when she was 21, 22, a student of mine.
Okay.
And traveled with me to West Africa, and then was the producer of my radio show for a couple of years.
And what perspective was she able to bring to the book?
Well, I have the old white guy down. So that's, what I bring to the table, and that's the view of the world. Hopefully I've learned and grown, but she just brought a young woman's perspective. Now she's from Vancouver, which probably here in the States they go like whatever, but in Canada, Montreal and BC are different places. She undoubtedly brought a young woman's view, so Gen Zers' view to the world. So that was extremely useful.
Both of you were honored recently by the Senate in Canada. They introduced you, you talked about your research, you talked about your book, and then you were honored. For you, what was that like to be able to present your research and your book to the Senate first, but then also to receive such a wonderful recognition?
Well, the honor, I was not expecting it. And, it was a great honor to be there. Gabby joined from law school by Zoom. We had a half hour with a number of senators and, many other staff as well. So that was just a signal honor. And the Senate in Canada is not as important as the Senate down here, where Obama went from senator to president, but many of them I recognized because they had very impressive careers before they were appointed to the Senate. Mm-hmm. And then I had lunch with Senator Loffreda, and then one of us said, "You got to come upstairs to the opening of the Senate in the afternoon. Tony's going to say something." And I thought he might just say, "Just want to thank Professor Moore," or something. But he went on for 2 minutes. And it was almost embarrassing. On the other hand, we get enough criticism, Tom, a bit of praise.
Yeah.
And it was a bit overdone, but hey, he's a good friend, and I'm not going to argue the point. And I saw him literally yesterday in a restaurant. He sat in the table beside me. I was with one guy, and he was with another. And I said, "Tony, in many, many, many years, at my funeral, they'll probably play that clip, my children, because it was such a signal honor to have. And I hope it's many, many years. So we'll see what happens." But it's the sort of thing where you don't get many honors like that in life. I'll probably get nothing like that ever again. So enjoy it, celebrate it, and be thankful.
Karl Moore, thank you as always. We Are All Ambiverts Now is the latest book, of course, available in bookstores, online, and all the usual places, and a great read. And thank you as always for taking the time to come down and see us.
Always a pleasure, Tom.